Vision that we need to do this while I'm still here, and so I'm going to kind of let him be in charge. But anyway, I've asked him to say a prayer because I feel like I need all the praying I can get, and then anything you want to do, and then what I would like to do is just take about 5 or 10 minutes, maybe not even that long, to because my understanding is what we're trying to find out is what I remember basically about the 30s. In other words, that's quite a lot happened in that time, and what was it like in Vernon, and how was it with us and the family, and is that what we're talking? Is that
I
about?
think you can start there, and if people have other questions, they can ask whatever they want.
Yeah. So Jeff,
I mean, we basically want to capture what we can from your memories while
yeah,
you still have it and can express it.
good point.
So we're just so grateful, Dad. He's not feeling well today, so so we have to pray for him to be strong and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So he's asked me to offer that prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to be able to come to Thee in prayer. We're so grateful for Thy kindness and generosity. We're grateful for the gifts of the Spirit we enjoy. We're so grateful for this wonderful family that Thou hast blessed us with. We're grateful for the foundation of faith that supports and strengthens it, and that helps us feel one with one another. We're grateful to Dad for the wonderful life he's lived. We're grateful for his parents and siblings for their wonderful lives and for the great example they've set for us as a family. We're grateful that Dad is here, that his mind is clear, that he can still remember critical things well. We pray that Thou wilt pour Thy Spirit out upon him, that he will be guided by Thee and strengthened by Thee, that his memory will be clear, that his voice will be strong, that he will be able to share with us the things that Thou would most want us to hear about our ancestors' history in Vernon, and that Thou would inspire us to ask appropriate questions to help in that process. We pray that Thou will be with Matt and all of his equipment, that this will be recorded well, that we'll be able to preserve it and pass it on. Once again, we're so grateful to Thee for the wonderful blessings we enjoy, and especially for Thy Son, Jesus Christ. And we offer this prayer in His sacred name. Amen.
Amen. Well, what I thought I would do to kind of set the stage for you for the 30s, I think it's important for all of you to realize that when my mother met my father and when they got married, the Olsons were a prospering family. My father and his brother Arvel had herded sheep for many years, quite a few years. They were still young, and Dad would have been about 21, and Uncle Arvel about 20. When their mother died, and their uncle inherited the Nielsen Ranch, and they bought it. The two brothers, and they formed what they called Olson Brothers. Now, Uncle Dewey was part of this also, but he was a lot younger. So basically, it was Dad and Arvel. And now they moved into what to me was a mansion when I was young. It's what we now call the Nielsen cabin, but remember it had two nice adobe rooms on the back side. It was very nice. They had the pond, they had all that irrigation water, and they homesteaded, and they got the homesteads already, and then homesteaded more, and they ended up with 1,440 acres of homesteaded land out there. That's a lot of land. And early on, they harvested beef, maybe some sheep and maybe pigs, but mostly it was beef, and then women would candle eggs. And Merker was at that time a city there in the south end of the valley, and it was booming. I think it actually got up to where it was at one point up to 10,000 people. Well, Utah around the turn of the century, that's a big city. And they would kill these, and then they'd leave early in the morning and take them on a freight dump with the wagons and go around. Mostly they sold into butcher shops and stores, and they got paid in silver and gold. And that was the situation, I think, pretty much when my mother arrived. But then Merker, as is so often true with mining places, just went, and that ended. But they were able to lease the best ranch in the valley. We call it the Fost Ranch. And they went all out. They didn't worry about borrowing money. They borrowed money because it was booming. It's sad to say that during wars, you often have boom times. And they did. And Rush Valley, south end of the valley and the west end of the valley, was all torn up into winter wheat. And they were part of this. And so they bought a big tractor, I still remember it. They bought a big plows. They bought a huge harvester that took 30 head of horses to pull it, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, they didn't hesitate to go out and buy stuff, and borrow money, and to do all of this. But they were doing well, okay? And we won't go into all the details about Simpson unless some of you ask questions, or Castella, or places like that, because but at any point, everything was really going great. And then in 1923, my Aunt Alda, that's mother's sister, who married Uncle Arville. Maybe you need to know that. Two brothers married two sisters. And so Aunt Alda lived there up on the flat. And Aunt Alda gave an edict says, we're moving to Provo. We're leaving. And they did. And a year later, we have all of the documents now, why everything then essentially became Dad's. But also what became his was not only the property, all the debt. So he inherited, and so he had 1,440 acres of land, and things were going pretty good until the crash, 1929. And what happened is there was a run on banks. I won't go into all of that, but the net effect was that the Tooele Bank came to him and pay us money. He didn't have it. I can still see him. It would have been about, I figure it's about 1930. As why they Tooele Land Bank came, took all our cattle. I can see him going up over that hill, and Cal and I were talking about it a couple of months ago, and he was only about 5. But he said, I remember it very well, Ferron. There went our herd of cattle. All they left then was a few milk cows, 2 or 3 milk cows. That was it. So from the milk, we would separate it with a separator, take the cream off, and they could sell the cream, and then they'd sell it, and they'd get a cream check, which would be about $2 for a 3-gallon, and essentially that was it. My mother wrote, and I have a copy of the letter, to her sister, Amanda Edwards, on January the 2nd, 1932. She said, I had 70 cents to spend on Christmas. I saw to it each of the kids got an orange. That's probably the only orange we had all year, and a 10-cent present. It was that bad. Now, what may kind of surprise you was the fact that we actually had an increase in people out in Vernon and Rush Valley. Things were worse in the city than they were in the country. And in about 1930, 31, when I was in the 5th grade, I can still remember it, Vernon School had 100 students. That's probably the most it's ever had, ever had. And they even had to go to the overflow recreation room and have a 4th room to take care of all of the students. But then what happened was the drought. The drought. Now, when the drought came, all of those that were, and we had quite a few neighbors out west. Okay? I mean, people lived up there, 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 out west where we were. But they had nothing to turn to. We had the pond. They left. 5 years later, 30 students in Vernon. We're the only family living out west. All the rest are gone. A couple of miles east of us is the Yates family, and that's the situation. Now, I've got to just put in a couple of things and then we'll open it for questions. But that's our situation. So my point that I wanted to make is in the beginning, in those early 30s, we are dirt poor. I don't know that as kids we really knew that we were so poor. But the fact is we were. Mother and Dad, and I think they involved the family, but I'm not too clear on that. But in any case, they felt, now if we'll just pay our tithing, it looked like to get rid out of debt was impossible. And now fortunately, the Federal Land Bank sort of just closed its doors and said, just forget it for now, you can pay later. So they didn't foreclose. The Tooele Bank, even though they took the cattle, it wasn't enough. We still owed them money. Anyway, they sat down and if we'll just pay our tithing, the day will come, we'll be out of debt. And so they did, and they did. The day came, they were out of debt. Well, do you kind of get the lay of the land now? Here we are, Mother and Dad out there, 4 kids. At this point, there was a time we didn't even have a car at all. In 1931, we didn't have any transportation. But then things got a little better. I can tell you how it was. Very clever of my father. And things started looking up somewhat, but still it was a rough time. Okay.
Would you go on and tell us about how he was clever? Because you said that
So
out
keep
of
What?
going.
Yeah, you can keep
talked
going
about
with
it
that.
with the sheep.
And just keep going.
I do have one question. So what's the time frame? So when you had 100, what year was it when you had 100 students in the school? So when
She missed the beginning. This is
When we had 100, 1930,
1930.
he's in the
31,
1930s.
30, 30. Right after, it was actually, like I said, right after the October 29th, because why? People were leaving the city. At least they could, they could do something out of the,
What years were the drought? And when you answer, you ought to sort of repeat the question.
I would say that the drought probably hit about 1932 or 33. And the sad part of it was, remember, all that land has been plowed. And the wind came, and the wind blew, and the dust. I mean, they talk about the Oklahoma Dust Bowl. We were right in the middle of a dust bowl, and it was just terrible. I mean, you could hardly see sometimes the dust. When we get a rainstorm up in the south end of the valley, because there was no grass, no place for the moisture to go, it looked like a lake because you can only see the water. If we had it once in a while, we'd get a good rainstorm. Didn't happen very often, but we'd get one. And then the water would come flooding right down just west of the house there. And I walked out there one time, and the water was clear across that bottom, and it was 2 foot deep. It completely, one year we planted sugar beets in what we called the 6-acre piece, just west of the house. And the flood just took the whole crop, dirt, beets, and all, and just took them out. Yeah. Okay. Questions?
How did you get transportation back when you didn't have a car? And tell us about when you lost Grandma's accident, when you lost
Okay.
the car.
It was either the fall of 1929 or spring of 1930, because Mother was pregnant with Donna when it happened, and she liked to drive fast, which in those days on the road from Vernon to Tooele was about 40 miles an hour. And you're supposed to go about 35. And Cal and Betty are in the back seat with a whole bunch of eggs we were taking down to sell to the grocery store in trade. And Cal was teasing Betty, and Mother had called to him, and finally she turned around to give him a whop, turned back, and the car was just racing right off the road. And she whipped it around to keep it from going off that side, which luckily it didn't. It went off the other side. But it rolled, it literally rolled end over end. Well, it threw Betty and Cal out of the car, and all of the eggs were scattered along the road. And I had a little leather coat on, and the door is closed on my jacket. So somehow, in all the tumbling, the door flies open, my flap of my leather coat flops out, the door slams shut on it, and we're lying on that side, and it's, so that gives you an idea. I mean, the car was completely obliterated. It was gone. But there weren't many eggs that were broken. But Mother felt like that she was fine. I think that was a downturn. Didn't seem like her health was really very good. Now, we had a guy out there, Clough Cartwright, big, gruff old Clough. And this is the time now when we've got a lot of students going to school. And there was us and the Cartwrights and then another family, I can't think of their name, and so on. And he got a contract from the school board, and with the contract came a truck, a 1.5-ton truck. Now that was a big truck. It was a good truck. It was a big bed, and it had slat things on the side. And the idea was to put a canvas top over the top of it and close in the gaps on the side. And then they made some benches to put on either side and bench on the back that you could climb up, and that became the school bus, if you can imagine. But he did something shady. I don't know what it was. But knowing Clough, he bragged about it. I mean, that's just, I'm supposing. Anyway, they got word of it. They were furious. they took it away from him. And they gave it to Dad. And we had a truck. Because we didn't even have a buggy. So to go to town, it was, I never saw Mother ever ride a horse. I never, if she did, I never saw it. It would have been a wagon, or in winter time it would have been a sleigh. So then we got transportation. We had a truck. But you probably want to hear about the Still incident, don't you?
Was that the truck that you
Sure.
had to drain the oil out
About
of
the
every
truck,
night?
the incredibly cold winter. Tell us about the incredibly cold winter with the truck.
Okay. My Uncle Orville's family were having it even rougher in Provo. So he came out. One of the things they did back then, which was very nice, they would arrange it in the winter time so the farmers could haul gravel to put gravel on the road. See, the road to Tooele and up over to Tinnick and so on was gravel. Out our way, just plain old dirt. We didn't get. But anyway, and so when the winter would come, we had a special wagon. I can still see it. We had 2x6s that would lay on the bottom, and at the end they would cut them back so you could, like little, kind of like a handle, and then everything was done with horses. They didn't use tractors at that time, at least in this. And then they'd go in and pull under, and they would bring a load of gravel up and pull it up. They had a setup. They had load your wagon with gravel, then you'd drive out in the road where they wanted the gravel, and you would just turn those 2x6s, and the gravel would all fall through underneath, and then you'd turn it back and go back and get some more. Well, they got paid for this, and so Dad got paid to do that. So he went out and camped and did the road work, and Uncle Orville drove the truck. And Uncle Orville, so then they got money. I still remember, it was so vivid to me because it got so cold, and Dad is headed out Sunday afternoon. It was up at Dunbar at the time, where he was getting the gravel and camping. And when snow gets really, really cold, and you have the metal tread on the wagon wheels, and they turn, it squeals. Yeah, and it squealed. And this just told me, I thought, and he's camping out in a tent. And remember in those days, no sleeping bags. And a tent, and weather like this. It just hit me hard what he was going through. You had more of that.
Well, about the truck, about the school bus truck, and how you handled it that cold winter when it was.
Yeah, right.
And tell me how cold it was.
It got to 40 below, but 20 below was not at all unusual that winter. Okay, we didn't use antifreeze, so you drained the water. If you didn't, and constantly radiators were freezing up on you, you'd wait too long, and so we drained all the water and we drained the oil. And we had a big horse blanket we'd put over the engine, and then we would make a little fire under the rear differential. We'd warm up the oil, put warm oil in, get hot water and pour over the carburetor, put hot water back in there, and I'd get old Bolly and fasten him to the front of the school bus, the truck. And Uncle Orville would get inside and ready to go. And Bolly'd lean forward, and it would crack because the grease would have frozen. It never failed. We never missed getting that to the kids to school.
What time would that be that you'd be doing all that? I mean,
This was November.
well, how early in the morning would you have to get up to do
Oh,
all
yeah.
that? Before?
And it was 1932. I've often noticed, if you look, it's amazing how often, if you want to find the coldest day in November, it's 1930, sometime in 1932. So I know it was 1932.
And how do they keep the school children warm?
Mother would heat bricks in the oven, and then she'd have a gunny sack, and there were, how many kids were there? There were about 15 of us, maybe more, 15, 7. Anyway, and then each one of us would have a gunny sack with a hot brick in the bottom. Well, Uncle Orville, they decided maybe they needed to put a stove in the truck, but then the cold snap broke, and so they never did. But we took it there all the time.
What did you do for entertainment, both in your family and also in the Vernon community?
Games.
But something
Why about the Vernon community?
something that people may not appreciate. Starting right around the 1st of October, it was when your farm work's done, potatoes harvested and stuff like that, they would start having dances. And we would have a dance every other Saturday. And the orchestra, bless their hearts, Lawrence Sharp was the bishop, and they were the band. He played the drums, and his wife Joyce played the piano, and he had a brother who was quite heavy, was older than Lawrence, but he couldn't walk. Lawrence carried him wherever he went, and he did. And he played the saxophone, and we danced. And so we would dance, and everybody came to the dances. And they would take the benches and put them around the wall and put the little kids down, let them sleep on the bench, and we'd dance for about an hour, and then we'd have a break, and the mothers would have brought cake and ice cream. We made ice cream, after all, we had ice, and we'd have a cake and ice cream, and then we'd dance some more. And you never took a date, but you'd often take a date home. That was not that uncommon. And then, like, I think it was Merle, we loved to play games, and we played a lot. With us out west, we played lots of rook and good heavens.
When was the first time you had a rook cards? There's such a tradition in the Olson family. When was the first?
I'm not very
Do you
good at
remember?
that. My feeling is that it was not the first. There was other stuff before the rook. And my feeling is that it came from Man Alda's family, that they brought it from Provo. Because we always talked about the tradition. Well, it was they're the ones that gave us the tradition that we have about one high and stuff like that. So when all I know is that Cal hated to lose. And if he lost, he often cried.
Still there.
And tell us about people coming from outside areas to the dances and drinking and Aunt Betty's experience.
Should I go all the way?
Yeah. And tell us about Aunt Betty and the piano.
It wasn't uncommon for us to have cowboys show up for these dances. And it was not all that uncommon for them to bring their liquor along. And they'd never bring it in the meeting, but they would slip outside and have a snort, and then they'd go back in. And we got to realize at that time there was no town organization. There was no mayor, no city council. The church did everything. The bishop was the mayor. The bishop was and so we did everything was done. It wasn't done at the schoolhouse. It was done there at you see, the church house what this was built as an amusement hall. And then the church was condemned. It was a brick went across the street. I vaguely remember it. And they tore it down, and it's where that duplex apartment is now. And then they made this rec hall became the church. So they had benches they'd set up, and they had a dais that was about a foot high that they put up in the front right next to the stage. And it had, I don't think it was individual chairs. It seems to me, do you remember, Merle?
They didn't.
Anyway, there was room up in the front, I think, for about 4
Yeah,
people up on that dais.
but I can't remember.
And there was a
if they were individual
pulpit.
chairs or not.
And
Just
so,
the benches we sat on.
so when we had those dances, you see, they just moved things back. And at that time, they heated the building with a great big pot-bellied iron stove. I mean, it was a great big thing. Sat back, and then one of them back in the northeast corner of the room, and then one up towards by the front of the building in the southeast. Oh, on the stage, the junior Sunday school, they used the stage, and then there was a drape that went across. They used the stage for their opening and so on, and then on either side there was a dressing room, and that became their other room. So they used up there. So it meant that when we had separated for classes, you had a class over here and a class over here. I mean, if you really, if you really wanted to, and especially if your teacher got kind of boring, why just, because I can hear what's going on right over there, or right over there, whichever one I want to pick. But they were great ones to have stuff like this. Okay, we're back to the liquor. Oh, Merle, you're here. Let's see. Okay.
If you don't want to give names, that's fine.
You gotta give the name. It's Merle's dad.
Believe anything.
There was about 4 boys his age. I think a little bit, Robert Dirt, I think, was a little older. Ken Fred, and anyway, and they were cut-ups. But who do you think was the chief cut-up? Who was the leader? Who was the one behind all of that went on? And so tipping over the toilet outhouse over, or, you know, I remember one time Bishop Lawrence Sharp got up. Now he says, I noticed the gate is gone from my such and such. Now I know who did it, and I want that gate back by in the morning. I knew you get the idea. Well. Cal, they found when they were horsing around outside, a whiskey bottle, and it was about half, maybe a little less than half, full of whiskey. So they dumped the whiskey out and peed in it. And Cal said the funny thing is it didn't seem to bother him at all. Cal, I'm sorry about that.
I thought you were going to say they drank and I'm relieved.
What about, tell us about the person who came over from Fairfield. And that one you might not want to mention his name.
Yeah, this is very important. Remember, you took a date home. There was a family, and matter of fact, they were related to us. They were the Larsons. And Elmer Larson married something Flack. Allie. Yeah, Allie. And Allie had a younger brother, Bert, just between you and me, I think he was LDS, but honestly, he was a. Well, I shouldn't say anymore. Anyway, he had been drinking, and he wanted to take Betty home. She says no. One thing you got to know about Betty, when she no, I mean, yeah, that's it. And no, anyway, so we had another family there by the name of Chase, and Ferron Chase's younger brother, I've forgotten his first name, he took her home. And he drove up towards Dunbar on the Dunbar Road, and Bert comes flying by, and he's got I think a couple of the Hillman girls, and he comes sailing by, went up the road, turned around, came roaring back, and hit him head on. It was luckily nobody was seriously injured, but it was very traumatic for Betty. Very, very traumatic. And to make matters worse, that this was at a time when Dad was herding sheep with Uncle Milton, and not long after that, we brought some of the wild horses in and loaded one up to take up on the ranch for Dad to help to break to ride, and they had the trailer behind their car, and somebody hit him, knocked the trailer over, and I guess Betty just went into pieces, which is understandable. I mean, because it wasn't long after. I mean,
So how old would Betty
maybe
have
less than a month. What?
How old would Betty have been at that head-on collision?
What can I try it
Do you know, Christian?
to? We're talking about the late 30s now.
My mom said it hurt her knees. That there's
It
flat
did.
Her knees. and
Hurt her
it
knee.
made
Her knee went up against the.
And she said how badly that it hurt for. I don't know if it's broken, but she said it hurt for a long time. Her knee was the.
Mm-hmm.
Both her knees banged in, but her one.
Thanks. I'd forgotten that, but it did.
She said her.
Hurt her knee. How old was she?
In my mind, I want to say 16, 17, because she hadn't left for Salt Lake yet. 15, I'm thinking 15, 16, 17, along.
Somewhere in the late 30s.
Yeah.
I think you're right. She was about 16.
Tell me about Betty and the piano.
Betty had a rare musical mind. She really did. We did better. Maybe I need to tell you how we did do better. He was very enterprising of my father. See, he knew all of the sheepmen really quite well. And Cal has I've seen the book. I think Mark has it now. And Dad knew the sheepmen, and he knew that very often, nearly always, there are strays in a herd of sheep from out in the desert. And so he got permission from the sheepmen to take their sheep, if they were strays, to take them out and hold them, and then they'd come and get them from him, and then they'd get their sheep back, and they paid him 50 cents a piece, or I think more. I think they paid him with sheep, and it was very effective. And he would go down. He worked this with Amos Davis at the Davis Ranch, because they watered their herd there. So he'd see the sheep and they'd come through. Here they are, and if you see one coming through with a brand that doesn't fit, out they go, out they go, out they go. And they couldn't say anything. It's not theirs It's not theirs anyway. I mean, it's a stray. And gradually we build up to where by 1933, 34, 35 now, we've got a couple of hundred head of sheep. And now we have a lamb crop. And a lamb crop was very valuable. We were able to buy a Model A Ford. And things began to be looking better. Yeah.
Betty and the piano.
We were able to get enough money to buy a piano for $25. And so Betty had a piano. She'd go over at the dances and she'd just stand there. I can still see her. Just stand there. And then she'd go home and play it.
She did that her whole life. If somebody would play it, she could sit down and she could play the song.
And she'd play it. Amazing.
I've been dominating the questions because I know there were some things I wanted to bring out, but anyone have other questions?
So what year was it that older gentleman that was living out in the flat by himself? I think that's a great story because Grandma invited him in. And
Yeah. Everybody's gone then. La da 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 da. Cal's married. And Mother and Dad are there all alone. The house is quite comfortable now. And we did that in 1949. No, 49. Before you were born. And 50, right about the time you were born.
Is that the house that we knew?
Mm-hmm.
When did you move? So that's when you built that to live in. You moved from the Nelson home to that home.
Yes.
Is around that time.
Yes.
Okay, because that's the house that we would have known.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I misheard that again.
And so there's just the two of them there. But still, the sheep camp shows up on the flat. And so Dad saddled up his old brownie and rode up there, and there's an old man up there. He's a high priest. And he didn't interrogate anything too much, except the guy told him the family kicked him out, and he had a few sheep, about 15 head or so. And he said, isn't this government land I'm on? And Dad said, yeah. I said, well, I thought I would just dig a well, and I can just have these few sheep here, and I'll just spend the winter out here in my sheep camp. And Dad said, oh my golly, it gets awfully cold out here. And he was old. I mean, he was, well, I think he died about 4 or 5 years later. And Dad said, oh, you can't do that. Why don't you come put your few head of sheep in with ours, and we've got a room. And so he did. And they took him in, and I can still, I guess I've got it second hand, but it just sounds so real that it sure it's true. Now, Brother Anderson, I've drawn the water. There are clean garments there and a nice towel. Now you go in and take a bath. Okay. And he lived with him there for 3 or 4 years, and then he died. So he spent the rest of his days there, yeah.
Movies were really important back then. What did people do for movies?
Yeah, our ward was pretty enterprising. And I don't know the year of this. Merle, do you remember, did you go to those movies?
Over at the church?
Uh-huh.
Oh, heaven, yes, I did. The Scouts used
Describe
to put 'em on.
it. Describe
scouts,
it.
the scouts would put it on. They would go through the mail, and they would mail back to, I don't know, Hollywood or somewhere, and they would get the big reels for a lot of the old movies, and then they would bring them to the church house, and the scouts would they'd show us the movie, and they'd give us the free popcorn. It was like going to a movie theater, but we paid so the scouts would have money to do things in the ward. But they had a reel to reel, and they'd play
Now,
it
did
for
they-
us. I mean, we had some amazingly good.
Did they just set it up
Disney
in the back
movies.
of the room there
They
then?
set it up in the back of the room, and we had the benches on the sides, and I can't remember what the screen was, but they had the screen in the front, and then they'd just show the movies. They would all just sit there and watch all the old Disney movies. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
See, that was kind of after my time.
Yeah. But yeah, before, yeah.
But did they do movies when you were there?
I don't think so. I
Did
don't
you ever
know.
see any movies?
Oh, my mother loved movies. If we could ever work at the movie theater, we'd go. But this
That in
shows.
Tooele?
Yeah, this shows who's boss. See, Dad was very quiet. He didn't talk much. As a matter of fact, when Mother stayed with us there in Berkeley, I can still see her sitting there at the table, and she knows she's not going to last long. She was gone in 6 months, maybe 8 months. It's just, I wonder what it'll be like when I go to the other side. Now, Ern'll be there, but he'll be kind of towards the back. I don't believe it, but that's Dad. He'll kind of be towards the back. And she was a talker. She was a doer. And anyway, where were we?
Movies, and she loved movies.
So we're going to the movie. It's a big occasion. Oh, we're all excited and everything, and I can remember it very well because we love movies too, and we're all excited about going, and we sit down and for dinner and so on, and Dad says, "I don't think we should go." That was it. Mother didn't say, "Oh, Ern, please, please." That was it. We didn't go. That's taught a lesson to me. That was it.
How often did you go?
Not very often. Mostly it was. You say did when most of our movies were in Provo. You see, the thing you've got to realize is here you've got Mother's sister and Father's brother live in Provo. And any chance we get, we go to Provo. And if we went to Provo, you can bet your bottom dollar on it, Mother saw a movie while we were there. So I think most of my movies, I remember Tarzan, and I'd hide, I remember those Tarzan movies, and I wasn't very old, so.
How often would they go to Provo? Roughly.
We made it a point to nearly always be there for the 4th of July. And
How long would it take to get there?
about an hour,
That's about what it is now.
a little over an hour. Yeah, a little over an hour.
I was going to say, because I'm sure you didn't go as fast as we do, and still an hour.
Well, the
Still
road,
the dirt
the
road.
road across East Valley now, I think, is worse than it was then.
Yeah. It is.
It's horrible.
It's
Yeah.
horrible now. It is.
And so, yeah. Now, if we had any rain, and then we'd get flooding, and it would often make that one wash. So it wasn't safe to get through it. And you usually didn't go until it dried up a little bit. Yeah. And I drove. See, after Mother had that accident, she hated to drive. the winter of, I don't know if any of you knew this or not, but the winter of 1936, 37, I didn't go to school. I stayed home. Dad was with the sheep down in southern Utah. I was herding for Uncle Milton. And the year before is when Donna and I nearly died from the scarlet fever. And I stayed home and helped with the farm, and I built cabinets for Mother and got hooked on the radio. Mother loved to hear the what do you call them, soap operas. And she had about 3 or 4 of them that she loved, and pretty soon I got hooked on them because I worked on these. I built these cabinets. I built all those lower cabinets in the kitchen, and I'd work away not very fast and listen to the radio. And I just anyway. The point is, I drove the school bus. The school bus was the Model A Ford. And that was it.
How old were you?
15. Didn't even have a license. And the local town knew it. But, they knew, and Mother always went. She sat in the passenger seat, and I drove, and the kids were piled in back. And it was Cal and Donna. Betty was... I guess Betty, too. Well, it wouldn't have been Donna. Donna wouldn't have been going yet, would she? Would have been Betty and Cal. And then I think Levon Yates and Robert Durant. There were about 4 or 5. And here just a few years before we had the truck, it was 15 or more. And that was it. 3 families. And they'd sit in back, and people would just wink at it. And
What soap operas did she love?
Can you remember, Merle?
No, I just say General Hospital because my mother listened to that. It's probably been around forever.
She watched
The
soap
Guiding
operas when
Light?
she stayed at our house because it broke my heart as little kids. We'd have to fight to watch Romper Room. Grandma got there first as soon as the soap started. She watched about 4 of them. You're just I never did like soaps because of that.
Well, my mom watched it. Real quick, Dad always talked about a Christmas that you helped and how Grandma surprised you.
Yeah. I've
I
written
heard that.
I've written this up. It might be a story I could have submitted to see if the Desert News or somebody would want to write it. It would have been right when we were right at rock bottom, 31, right in that time, right then. And I'll make the long story short. Christmas Eve, in the mail comes a letter from the government, and it had a check for $45. Now I have no idea what the source of that $45. It was government. Why? Was this something, I don't know, this reason, anything. But my point is there's no way, all of the shopping we did was in Tooele.
And it was unexpected.
And it's Christmas Eve. Totally unexpected. Whatever it was not, and I like I said, I drove the car over, and anyway, Mother said, we'll surprise your dad. So she wrapped it up and put it under the tree, and at that time we had a bed in the front room. Somebody slept. It was probably Betty, I think. Anyway, we had a bed in the front room. And Dad's sitting on the bed. I can still see him sitting there. and he's looking pretty down, and you got a sense like as if he's is this all the Christmas I can do for my family, you know? Feeling awfully low. And Mother says, Ferron, now we didn't tell anybody else, just the two of Mother and I. Isn't there another present under the tree? Oh yeah, there is. Well, what is it? And so I reached back under, I put it there, so. Oh yes, I brought it out, says, oh, it said to Ernest Olson. Dad says, what's that? For me? What is it? So I hand it to him, and he pulled it open, and out comes that $45 check. He just sat there, and tears started flowing. And I remember it so vividly because to me, my dad was not a person to cry. Now later on he was, but he wasn't early on. And it was very tender. Yeah. $45 then? Wow.
What
Yeah.
games did you play as children? Outside.
And Jeff's setting me up, but it is cute. Here we are, stuck out there all by ourselves. We had 2 dogs. One of them, I think, was Kirk. We had 2 dogs, and we played ball. So there, now I want you to get the picture. There's Cal and Betty and me, and Donna is about 4 or 5, so she's not much of a participant. So basically there's 3 of us. So one of us is the catch, one of us is the pitch, and the other one is the hitter. That's kind of a scarce field. Now if the hitter was good enough to get on a pretty good one and send it out, then the hitter could pretty well, the bases weren't that far apart anyway, could pretty well run the bases and then get up to bat again. But if something happened, especially if the hit the ball and the pitch caught it, or we got it back somehow before he could make it around, well then they'd get out and then we would rotate, and then the hitter is out, the hitter becomes the pitch becomes the catch, and the catch becomes the batter. Well, those 2 dogs were our fielders. And I can still see them, and they were so competitive that they literally would get bloody noses to try to get there first to get that ball and bring the ball back to us. We didn't do that too often, but we did once in a while.
What do you remember about your grandparents?
I'm sorry to say that I only have one grandparent that I remember, and that was Grandma Olson. Now, it's true, I was 5 when Emil Olson died. I should have good memories of him, but I don't. I really don't. I mean, I'm not sure why, but Grandma was awfully stern. And Aunt Alta and Grandma did not get along very well. And I think one of the reasons that Aunt Alta went back to Provo was she felt like that Arvil was his mama's spoiled boy. And she's up there anyway. The point I wanted to make was that when Grandpa Olson died, she's all alone. And she didn't like sleeping alone. And so here she takes this 5 or 6-year-old boy, and I became her sleeping companion. And I can remember, ooh, how nice it was to snuggling next to Grandma. I must have been a really quiet sleeper. But as a result of that, I missed the most exciting thing that happened in my young years. We had a family by the name of Hallman from up in Centerville, and they had rowdy, mean kids. And they bought a ranch, 40-acre ranch, just west of us, and moved out there. And I think the whole idea behind it was to get those kids out of break them away from the bad companions they had in Salt Lake. And they were rough. I'm not going to go into details, but one of them went to reform school, and I can understand why. Well, anyway, well, the kids got playing with matches and burned the house down. And so that meant the Hallman family turned to our family, and we kind of took them in and helped them for a while. But my point is that when all of the excitement of burning the house down and everything, I'm up there asleep with Grandma. It's all over when the next day when I get home, it's all over. So I missed the excitement.
So what was she like?
What?
Your grandmother?
I loved her. She was sweet and tender to me. She was, you've all seen that picture, and she's stern. And who's kind of got a little bit of a smile? It's Grandpa. But she was. And evidently she and Aunt Alda didn't get along well. And the word was that she ran the place. She was the boss. But by the time I got to know her, why, she's older now, and all of that's done, and so I got to see the tender part of her. But I loved Grandma. Yeah. You've seen that picture of me on her lap.
It's in your bedroom, right? We can go see it. Can we see it afterward?
She won't to.
Show them.
Mom's favorite memories, so she was the youngest, was the dancing. One of her favorite memories. Do you remember the dancing? You and Uncle Calvin and Betty and Mom.
The what?
And I tried to
When dancing as a family.
As a family. She remembers that.
Sure.
I tried to imagine that in the little in that little house, but where did you dance? And she said you couldn't do the jitterbug in the community dances because it was naughty, but you could do it at home. That's Mom's memory.
Remember dancing in the house with your mom and Cal and Betty and Donna?
Well, it'd be
Sorry,
important to her
I
because
can't.
she was so little. That was her interaction with her big brothers and her sister. Yeah, so you probably wouldn't, but yeah.
And Uncle
But
Ferron
I've got
was the saint.
What?
I said, you were the saint in the family. My dad always said he and Aunt Betty were the bad ones. Huh, Christy?
I got to tell you one on my mother.
Okay.
He would read to them, and they would do the work. He'd say, "Now I'm going to tell you a story. You didn't read. You tell him a story." Mom said, and she and Uncle Calvin would be doing the work, and then you'd stop just before it got to the good part and said, "It'll be continued tomorrow." And she said, we'd be going, "No." I said, "Yep, continue tomorrow."
My mother remembers your story. She got to just watch. She didn't have to do
Do
the
the
work.
work.
She loved that too, as
I
well.
still remember squirt, 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 talk, talk, talk. There they are, sitting there while I'm milking, listening to my story that I'm making up. I don't even know where we're going. Just telling it as we go along. Anyway, Vernon often had Christmas, Halloween, special things. And they had a Halloween party, a costume party. And Mother said, I just don't feel like going. Now, Dad didn't go, and often he didn't anyway, so, and I don't think he was too well at the time anyway. He was sick for a lot. He really was. So we go to the Halloween party, and we're dancing around, and this old tramp comes late and walks in and sits over there all by himself. I can still see him over on the west side, because most of the people, after all, the heat's over on the east side. So most of the people are over on the east side. So anyway, I'm dancing along and dancing by, and that's Mother. For heaven's sakes. And so then they had, at a certain point, they gave prizes for the best costume. And they give prize for so and so and so and so and so and so. And somebody said to the person, says, well, what about Hat? Doesn't she get a prize? Hat? She's not even here. What do you mean? Go look. Oh, my golly, Harriet, that's you. Well, now, I mean, that tells you. That's my mother.
My mom talked about how she'd always throw water. How your mother loved to throw water. Water
Oh,
fights, and she said she loved to throw
she
water.
did.
It is.
Did you have fun during the day? I mean, you were all out there alone. I mean, obviously you played baseball and things, but
Red. I'm not sure of the year, but it would had to have been when we were very, very poor. And it's the one time I saw my mother and father argue. And Mother felt that she should have, for the children, the encyclopedia, the World Book, I think it was called. And it was, I remember it was about $60, which meant that at that time, that was a lot of money. And Dad said, we can't do that, Hat. We cannot do it. He said, Ern, my kids are not going to grow up to be dumbskulls. We've got to have that encyclopedia for them. So they bought it. I read that thing from cover to cover. So I did an awful lot of reading. I think I didn't. All of us did quite a bit, but I know I read an awful lot. I spent a lot of time, and
Did the bookmobile, when did that, that must be way later.
I don't remember one back then.
Okay.
But I learned an awful lot, and when I didn't go to Tooele school until I was a junior, just the last 2 years, and I was kind of, well, I don't know.
Who did you live with in Tooele when you went into high school, Uncle Ferron?
I lived with Norman Yates the first year, and then Betty the second year. Anyway,
now you lived in a sheep camp
mhm,
in Tooele,
with Norman Yates.
so kind of not exactly your social standard.
Norman smoked. It's the only time in my life that I can remember I was almost took a smoke. I'm sitting there in the sheep camp and working on my lesson. Norman's gone somewhere, and he's got a pack of cigarettes sitting right up there, kind of like a cupboard, and it's right smack. I mean, just like that. I'm writing and stuff here and there, and one of the cigarettes is sticking out. And I thought, wow, I could just take a puff. But see, my mother talked to me. It wasn't Dad, it was Mother, early on. And I pledged to her that I would never smoke or drink. So the cigarette was not touched. Yeah, we slept in sleep camp, and Yeah.
You're about to tell us about what you were like as a student in Tooele because of the encyclopedia.
We had this Bill Garish. He was an amazing teacher. I just thought the world of him. I didn't know him, but right off the bat I knew I was going to like him. And anyway, so he's introducing physics. And he's got the class there of about, 15 or so. And he says, so what's the most malleable of all metals? Any of you know? I don't even think he knew my name. Yeah. What is it? Gold? Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're right. It's gold. Gold's the most malleable. And he goes on a little bit. He said, so what's the best conductor of electricity and heat of all the metals? Anybody know? Copper. Yeah, that's right. It is. It's copper. Copper, that's right. Well, all of these are things I learned from that encyclopedia. But you can imagine, I think right off the bat, and I can still see him. Who is this character out there, Vernon? Oh my.
So Uncle Farron, did you skip grades? Because I know Mother did.
Yeah, I
you skip
skipped one.
grades?
But then see, I stayed out a year.
Oh, right. Mother skipped a year, and I know in Tooele, it must have been after you left, but she boarded with a lady in Tooele. Mother didn't only live in the sheep camp, she boarded with
Lady
a lady.
Adkin. Mm-hmm. She and I boarded there when she was a junior, and then the following year she was there by herself. And the agreement we had is we'd supply them with potatoes. And they were wonderful. They were wonderful. But I'll tell you, we had potatoes for breakfast, we had potatoes for lunch, and potatoes for dinner. But that's all right. That's all right. I mean, they were having it rough too. And her husband had died. And, yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you had scarlet fever and something else.
Oh.
And I know Mom's talked about being nursed back to health. Do you want to tell us about that and the country doctor's feelings?
I don't understand scarlet fever because my cousin Jay and some of others of Van Alda's kids had scarlet fever. And I thought the world of Jay. He was 5 years older than me. I've always been very close to him. I stayed there in bed. I remember the next morning he's sick. I didn't get scarlet fever. Well, a year later, I'm sick. But then I started feeling better. And so we went to church, and then your mother, she got sick. And so my mother stayed home with your mother to take care of her. She's just a little girl now. And this is in the fall of 1935, so she's 5 years old. And we came home from church, and it had just snowed. It's about 3 inches of snow, and the sheep had got out and got onto the neighbors to the south, the Hillmans. And Dad drove the car up and said, Ferron, why don't you gather the sheep up and bring them down, which I did. And I'm just wearing Oxfords like this and so on. And I still remember, I brought the sheep in and come walking to the house and opened the door, and Mother's there, and she just, oh, Ferron, oh, Ferron, come on, let's get you in bed. You've got scarlet fever. Because she bathed Donna, and she'd seen, and I thought, she got it from Ferron. Ferron's got scarlet fever. So the two of us were sick. Interestingly enough, the other kids, nobody else got it.
had it earlier.
But we nearly died.
She talks about when she was 7 years old, how your mom carried her on her back from the one cabin to the other. She'd go over there to take care of grandma.
Wasn't that
And she, rheumatic fever.
rheumatic
Was
fever?
rheumatic
That was
fever.
rheumatic
rheumatic
fever.
Because it damaged her heart.
Yeah, it was rheumatic. And it did too. Oh, we were sick. We nearly died. We really nearly died.
How long were you sick, and how did they take care of you?
It's not all that clear to me. I know there was a lady in town that was kind of a nurse. I think she helped a lot, but I think it was priesthood blessings. And then when we got over it, we got the mumps. I went to school 60 days out of 180 that year.
Tell us about the birth of John Ephraim, your brother.
It's 1928. And I remember it just as clear as one of my memories that is just very vivid. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but Dad and I are in bed alone at what we call the upper place. And I don't remember there being a lot of furniture in there, but that part of it's kind of immaterial. And it's in the wee hours of the morning, and Uncle Arvel arrives from Provo with a casket with a baby in it. Now, how do you explain it? Dad's there with me. Uncle Arvel's bringing the casket with the baby, but I know that Dad was with Mother when he was born. So I have no idea why he came back to Vernon and Uncle Arvel came that morning. Anyway, we three of us drove over to the cemetery, and Dad and Uncle Arvel got this shovel and pick, and away they go digging the grave. And I remember standing there watching the sun come up over Dunbar Pass. It's the first time I'd ever seen a sunrise. See, I'm 7 years old. And the baby was born on May 22nd. So this is probably about May the 25th. And then they said a few words of prayer. One of them covered it back in again. We got in the car and headed for Provo. And that was it. And the idea when we went to Provo, we went to what they called Castella, but I don't know if I should get into that or not.
So were Betty and Cal already in Provo?
Mm-hmm. We spent an awful lot of time with Aunt Alda and Uncle Arvel. Really. Especially Aunt Alda. Yeah. Matter of fact, we were so close to their kids. Well, Ike still says, Ferron, he says, you're not my cousin, you're my brother.
Any other final questions? It's probably a good time for us to.
Oh my
I
goodness.
have a personal request. When Mom was born, she was sent to live with Aunt Alta. How did you remember that? How did you feel about that? What was happening at home? A baby's born and it's shipped away.
It was rough. It was rough, and we missed her, and so she was they left her with Aunt Alda at first, and then Aunt Violet and Uncle Clarence took her. And I can still remember when she's with them, and I can still remember sitting there talking, and Mother turns to Dad and said, urn, it is not right for us to leave Donna over there with them. We've either got to give her up and let them adopt her, or we've got to bring her home. Well, none of us wanted to give her up, so they went over and brought her home.
Why did they do it in the first place?
Mother was sick.
I was really sick.
She nearly died. Yeah,
So how did she care for her?
with difficulty. Yeah. You've all heard the incident of Mother in the still, but the spring of 19 I figured it had to have been the spring of 1931, summer of 1931. You see, in 32, President Roosevelt becomes president, and it isn't long they got rid of Prohibition. So we're still during the Prohibition era. And we are about, as I figure, going back, I figure that that's the fall events when we got the truck. But that summer of 1931 was probably our rock bottom. We didn't have any sheep, and you see it was the following Christmas when she had 70 cents. So I mean, it all kind of makes sense. And I can still remember we were out playing out in front of the house, and Donna now would be, so she's just a little squirt, about a year and a half, 2 years old, but she's there, Betty and Cal, and a big black car drives up. And these two guys get out. By now it's dusty and dirty, and they go in the house, and it was a pretty humble house, I can tell you that. And Mother was in there alone. I wasn't in with her. We're out in front. So, but we know enough, and I know enough about Mother to know what happened. Anyway, they mentioned to her that they've seen Ern in Salt Lake, and he had gotten a ride to Salt Lake. The one of the men was not, I don't think he was related, but I think he was married to one of the Dad's cousins, distant cousins. So there is a connection. So she knew.
It wasn't even a distant cousin.
What?
So I recall, it wasn't even a distant cousin.
Well, anyway, it was some tie somehow. And so anyway, the one, she said, well, what can I help you with? I said, well, now, as we've talked about it, I think we're right. That it would have been the Hall place, because there's just a mile south of us, and there's a wonderful flowing well. Still flows. And they said, now, you don't have to, it's not on your property, but we are going to install a still down there. And all we're coming to ask is, we've talked to Ernie, so it's okay with him. What we have to want to do is, all you need to do is turn your head the other way. And don't say anything to anybody. It's not your property. I mean, you're not, She said, you're bootleggers. Now, we've got we know of two other stills here in the valley, in the area. And said, and let me go on. He said, if you'll do that, and as we remember, we've kind of talked about it some, there will be a letter with $100 in bills, no return address, and it'll just be addressed to you, and it'll come every month. $100 a month? And the situation they're in, practically But they didn't know my mother. Well, I saw them when they came out. And let me tell you, they were two mighty different looking men than went in the house. And my understanding is she just turned on him. Just turned on him because she was so, knowing my mother, I know her well enough to know that she was just so, what should I say, so completely distraught to think that they wanted to take advantage of her under this situation to essentially break the law and not report that. It's men like you, get out, get out, get out, get out, get out. And they drove away and that ended it. Now, later she talked to Dad. He said, nah. He said, they found, I never even talked to them. They found out that I was in Salt Lake and they took advantage of it. But that was my mother. I've got to tell a lie story.
Okay.
Uncle Almy had a green and black wool shirt, and he grew out of it. And then he cut it down, and Earl wore it. And then Earl kind of grew out of it, and then Eldon did. And so I inherited that green. And you'll see me in some pictures. Of course, they aren't colored, but you'll see that checkered shirt. Milton Hall, you kind of know who he is, don't you? Dad's first cousin.
A lot younger.
He's a lot younger, yeah. He's 5 years older than me, maybe 6 years older than me. I still remember, we're down there in the field, and he said, Ferron, what is it? What is it? What is it? Oh my gosh. It's a louse. I went, my golly, Ferron, you got lice all over you. So we immediately ran up to the house, and we'd been having trouble with kind of funny looking, almost looked like bites and stuff, and Mother was putting stuff on it. Now we knew what the source of the problem was. But here's Mother. Ferron's lousy. It's possible some of the kids in Vernon are lousy. Without any hesitancy, she heads over to the school, gets a hold of Ray Pearson. He was kind of the unofficial, what should I say, emergency man. And they get all of the kids and go through their hair to see if any of them are lousy, but none of them were lousy. Now, in those days, to be lousy was a sign of what? What's the word I want? Sloveliness? I don't know. But to Mother, that it didn't matter. I mean, that shows how she. But it also, there's another side to her. And unfortunately, this got her into trouble every now and then. So, how did we get them? We're isolated out there. How did we get the lice? Where'd they come from? Oh, Milton had them too. We both had lice. He and I were sleeping together. That was in those days. You didn't sleep alone. He and I slept together, and I guess Cal must have not been sleeping with us because he didn't have them. But anyway, Milton says, a few days back I went up to get some of the sheep, remember, and was late when I finally found them, and Melvin Oburn was up there with his sheep camp, and I stayed overnight. And he had me put some stuff on some sores. And anyway, he felt like that he had enough evidence. That was the source. Now, here's an aside of Mother that was not good. She announces to the town that we got the lice from Melvin Oburn, and that meant that the Oberns were lousy, and he was herding sheep for the Baileys, and the Baileys were. I don't believe that Mother ever did completely reconcile those two families. Oh, it was terrible. We are not lousy, Harriet. You don't know what you're talking about, and
How did you get rid of him?
yeah, you're right. That's a big part of the story. I still remember. We went out to the clothesline and took a sheet, put a sheet over the clothesline, and Milton and I got behind the clothesline, the sheet, and Mother was on the other side, built a fire, and we took all of our clothes off and burned them. That was the end of the woolen sweater and all the lice. And then she had carefully washed with lye, and then she passed clean clothes back to us, and then we fumigated the house with sulfur. That was it. Mother said, if I could get rid of flies as easy as it was to get rid of lice, it would be wonderful. That was it. They were gone. Well,
Thank you so much,
you
Dad.
let me go in here.
We
Thank
need to do
you.
it again.
Well, I've enjoyed it.
Not
Thank
thrilled.
you.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Let's do it again. I want to hear about your World War II. I want to hear that story you put in the end sign from the source.
Oh,
So we need to do it again.
All right.
Move on.
Well, I can tell you that one. We landed at a city of about 30,000 in Japan. As the war's over, just barely over, called Wakayama. And I noticed as we went around and saw the Japanese that they were friendly. And I couldn't buy that. I hated them. I think Jeff's the one, when I wrote it up, said, Dad, you can't use such a terrible word. I said, Jeff, it's a letter I wrote. And that's what that's what I said. I hated them. And I just felt like that they were being put up. In other words, got to be friendly. You know, in other words, it wasn't sincere. And then we hadn't been there very many days when one of our guys got a Jeep, and you've seen the picture. Well, that really isn't us, but it typifies us. There's three of us. I'm the one standing there, and we haven't seen Wakayama yet. We're camped out on the beach in what was kind of a factory where we had our setup, but we haven't gone into the city. And we just pulled up over a little rise, and there's the city before us. And we just stopped and, oh my gosh, did we do that? It's nothing but ashes. The city is gone. It's about, it was about the size of Salt Lake. I mean, it was a good-sized city. And I didn't put this in my story because it's a little bit too morbid, but they don't have basements. And about all that you could see that was left was a little bit of concrete. Metal, anything that was metal would be warped and twisted. But most everything is bamboo. And the city is burned, And it's been done by us firebombing them. In other words, we didn't bomb them with explosives. We just dropped burning torches, so to speak. We just lit the city on fire. And I could visualize how awful. And as I saw that, I thought, my gosh, the people, that killed a lot of them, burned to death. I thought, oh, boy, how they must hate us. Oh, my gosh. So we then got in the Jeep and we drove on in, and we saw a few people. And they waved to us. I couldn't wave back. I just felt like, oh, they can't possibly be a sincere wave. I mean, and we see a shrine building off to the side that didn't get burned. There were fringes where it survived. And we went over and decided to go in. And we did, and we went in. And when I went in, and they greeted us, it came to me just as clear as it could be. Ferron, they love you. Why? I don't know. But it's sincere. They really do not hate you. And I just went through a total transformation and realized these people, for some strange reason, really do love us. And I forgave them. And when we drove away, I'm waving to them as we drive. It's in the end sign.
Well, thank you very much. When you're up to it, we'll schedule
Thank
another
you.
one. Thank you.
It's been great.
We have some refreshments. We have some cookies and a fruit smoothie and some bread. And so you're welcome to come in and get something. And we have to show you Grandpa on Grandma's lap, which actually I saw in
Can
Family
you
Search,
come
but
and
listed,
Yeah,
they had the wrong
because I've
person
got a
listed
little
as the
bad.
child. Anyhow, which happens all the time in Family Search.